Please take your seats. The session is about to begin. As a courtesy to our presenters, please silence all mobile devices. Thank you.
I think people come to CGI because they just want to start making good things happen. I think people get frustrated reading every day about how bad this, that, and the other thing is. Most people, in the face of trying times, want to be able to look their kids and grandkids in the eye and say, we did our best. Here's what was better when we quit than when we started. Here are the young people who have a better future. Here's what we did to try to hold things together while other people were trying to break us apart. That's the best any of us can do. And it's why we keep going, why we keep bringing people together and challenging each other to do more, to drive progress, and to build a future we can all be proud to share.
Please welcome to the stage Jonathan Capehart.
I realized I didn't have a lavalier mic on, so thank you very much for that applause and for being here. We don't have a lot of time, we've got a lot of people, so I'm gonna get into it. Our first discussion is with a leader who is showing up and fighting back in this time of global backlash on the LGBTQ rights. Please join me in welcoming Kelly Robinson, President of the Human Rights Campaign.
Hello.
Hello, Kelly. So nothing to talk about at all.
No, very calm world for LGBT rights these days.
Very calm. So in all seriousness, from your vantage point here in the United States, to be clear, how have the threats facing the LGBTQ plus community evolved or intensified in just the past year? Or I should say, in just the past 8 months.
Yeah. And I do want to say this. I think anyone that's come to this session knows that things are bad. And sometimes I'm traveling and people ask me, are things as bad as they seem? And I say, I fear that they may actually be worse than they seem. That there are such deep rifts that are happening in the progress that we thought we made that are going to impact us not for the next 2 or 4 years, but for a generation. And that doesn't mean that we're without hope, but we got to be clear about what we're fighting against right now and have the stamina and the will to get to the other side. So you asked me what's different about the attacks. Look, I work at the Human Rights Campaign, and we've got a beautiful building in downtown Washington, D.C. And I was talking to some of my team members, and they said, 5 and 10 years ago, if people disagreed with our cause and our mission, they would call in and they would say, we're praying for you. Now, if people disagree with our work or with our mission, they call in and they say, I might come and shoot up the office. And our challenge is to determine if that's a credible threat or not. That's the escalation. The violence that people are experiencing every day, the violence that's endorsed from people like at the White House that have some of the broadest reaching and most powerful podiums in the land. So if that's what we're up against, we have to be clear that the charge that we have is every day, first, to show up for the safety and well-being of our people. Second, to never take our voices for granted and use it in every way that we can. And third, to know that this is going to be a long fight to get to the other side and have the Constitution to stick with it.
So then, given everything that you just said, how are you putting those words into action as leader of HRC?
Yeah, look, the thing that gives me hope is what I see happening in communities every day. Just since last year at the Human Rights Campaign, we've had an additional 500,000 people raise their hand and say they want to be a part of this movement and this fight. That's huge. Somebody needs to clap for that. 500,000 people. The movement is building every day, and when people see the cruelty that's playing out, it's inspiring them to take action. Our job is to put all of that energy into actions that can actually make a difference, and that's what we're doing. And people often ask me, like, do I think that we'll get to the other side? And my answer is yes. We weren't just made for moments like this. Our movement was made in moments like this. My organization came out of the crisis of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. Our movement built power in the 60s when we were under attack from police raids and riots, and you had those brave folks step up from Compton's cafeteria to Stonewall to fight back and say no. This has always been the types of conditions that not just test movements, but build us for the future.
So can we talk about something that I don't think is talked about enough, and that is when we're talking about the LGBTQ plus community, I think a lot of people have one vision in mind of what that community might look like. But instead, you, sitting right here, you are a visible manifestation of the complexity of the community, of our community. Talk about how intersectionality impacts the way HRC goes about the work that it does and how it informs your leadership.
Yeah, look, it's the only pathway for survival for us. I'm a Black queer woman, proud of it every single day, let me tell you that. Yes, come on. And look, for me to build a movement that I can be a part of and be proud of, it's got to be intersectional. And anyone that doesn't get it just needs to look at what our opposition is doing. Anytime they're coming after abortion rights, those are the same people that are coming after gender-affirming care for our communities. Anytime that they are coming after or trying not to pass legislation around common sense gun laws, those are the same people that are banning books. They are weaponizing intersectionality, and the only way that we will get to the other side is by coming together. Look, I think one of the things that inspires me is the way that our world, and especially our country, is changing. We're on the verge, of course, of becoming a majority-minority country. 30% of Generation Z identify as a member of the community. And I think that what we're fighting right now is a tension between the changing demographics of the country that will also demand changes in who holds power. And I think that our opposition, and this is something one of my pastors told me when I was coming up, what they are so afraid of is that when we people that look and love like me hold the power that represents our numbers and our voices that we've always had, that we will treat them as terribly as they've treated us all of these hundreds of years. And if that's the fear that we're fighting against, what does it look like for us to imagine a world that's more free than anything we've ever seen before and do the work to build it together? What does it look like for us to understand that those positions of power are ours and we deserve them, but to imagine ways to leverage power differently that actually changes the world for future generations? That's the charge that's in front of us right now. And although it may be terrifying to some, it is hopeful and optimistic to me for so many reasons.
I was scribbling down, listening to that answer. Are people afraid of being free? Free of the hatred, free of the fear, do you think?
Yeah, I think people can't even imagine it yet. You know, and a lot of what we're doing right now, we're traveling the country to tell our stories. Because I think that in the algorithms of it all, in the pandemic, in these rushed interactions, what we're missing is getting back to our shared humanity and making sure that any lack of understanding isn't filled with hate and with chaos, but is filled with curiosity and empathy. And that comes back to how we tell our stories to each other, not just on stages like this, but in your Uber ride, right? And when you're getting a coffee and when you're walking down the street. And one of the things that we've encouraged folks to do is to imagine that world, imagine what it would feel like if you were fully free. And that has been the hardest thing for folks to get to because we're so used to being in fight or flight mode. And I think that that's really a charge right now, not to be afraid of what it looks like and what it feels like. And to know, and I think this is a real challenge for, you know, the massive backslide that they're trying to present on all of our civil rights and protections right now, is that we've already tasted a little bit of freedom and we're not willing to give it up.
So then, see, this always happens when Kelly and I talk. She is so enthusiastic and optimistic. You can't help but feel like everything's going to be all right. That being said, there's a lot of work to do. And so for the people who are in this room, and I'm not sure if folks are watching online, but they will watch later on, what is the single most important thing or impactful thing that they can do, either as an individual or as a collective, to get us over the hump to the other side through this, quite honestly, terrifying time that we're in right now?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think one of the most important things is to remember that we are not without hope and we are not without power. Look, I said it before, I'm a Black queer woman. If any of you have a time machine or access to one, I'm not getting in it, all right? I'm not going back. And I say that because I have to remind myself that though things are treacherous right now, we have made so much progress, right? And we didn't get here by accident. We got here because people believed that by taking actions, by making their voices heard, we could bring to life a reality that was more free than our parents and our parents' parents had. That's the moment that we're in. So when you ask me what can people do, something. Commit to doing something every day. That something might look like telling your story and not letting silence cloud the space when people have views that you know are not based in love, but really coming from a place of fear. Making your voice heard, particularly politically, right? Support candidates and leaders that stand up for equality and let them know that that's what you expect and demand as a constituency. And I also have to say this, invest. Invest. There are more fights than ever that we're facing in the US and around the world, and the only way that we can get to the other side of them is if people invest. And when I say invest, I mean invest like our lives depend on it, because they do.
You've got 30 seconds to explain to everyone, because that's all the time I have left with Kelly, 26 seconds. You are perennially and persistently optimistic. How is that possible, given everything that you see and have to deal with in the position that you're in?
Look, I see the hope play out every day in communities across this country, in teachers that create welcoming spaces for their students, in communities that are finding ways to survive in the most treacherous of circumstances. So I'm clear that we'll make our way through this. I also know, as the old folks used to tell me when I was growing up, We didn't come this far only to come this far.
Right, right.
We have work to do, and just by being here, we are the descendants of the people that have survived, of the people that have survived the AIDS crisis and the Middle Passage and so much more. How dare we not show up in this moment ready to do the work, ready to fight, ready to make sure that we are carrying on the legacy of our ancestors, and rather than feeling devastated by the work in front of us, I feel hopeful and optimistic that we've been called together to do something important.
And now you know why she is the president of the Human Rights Campaign. Kelly Robinson, thank you very much. Again, I forgot that I don't have a lavalier. Our next panel convenes. I'm going to stand right here to get out of the way of the people doing the chairs. Our next panel convenes 3 leaders who are creating economic mobility for LGBTQ plus people around the world and at the local level through funding and advocacy work. I read that a little too fast. They're not done with the chairs, but I will introduce them. Chirag Badlani of Alphawood Foundation, Mukame Marete of UHAI, EASHRI, and Ken Janssens from Open for Business. Ken, I'm gonna have you say your last name for me, but please welcome them to the stage. So Ken, as you can see, I'm sweating because I butchered your last name. Would you please tell everyone who you really are? What your name is?
Ken Janssens.
Janssens. Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here. Chirag, I'm going to start with you. As we just heard from Kelly, and as you very well know, the last year has brought many changes and challenges for the community. And I'm just wondering, how are these shifts impacting your organization, your partners, and grantees? And what are some of the recent pivots you've had to make in response?
Yeah, thanks for that. Kelly did allude to some of these. I would say we're a small funder in the Midwest. We're place-based funding. But what I think what is happening locally for us is a microcosm for what's happening in a lot of places. I'd say the biggest challenge for a lot of organizations is loss of government funding. That's obvious, and it's talked about a lot these last few days, but it's really hit a lot of organizations hard when you're doing housing for LGBT folks, seniors, or young people at risk, and you've lost HUD funding or you've lost other avenues for federal dollars to do that work. That's an immense challenge. In the HIV space, we have a goal in Illinois of getting to 0 new HIV infections by 2030. When you've lost HOPWA funding, when you've lost CDC, NIH grants to do that work, that becomes incredibly challenging. So certainly across the spectrum of organizations dealing with issues for the LGBTQ community, loss of funding is huge. Kelly alluded to the safety and security issues. We're seeing grantees having people show up to their events, or the opposite, buying all the tickets to their events, and then their events are completely empty. We're seeing risks to cybersecurity, threats and doxing to their office staff, so safety and security. And then third, I'd say, is the increased work. There's just more work for people in this environment. You have to work harder to eradicate a virus like HIV. You have to work harder when your clients are suffering greater mental health challenges and bigger legal challenges. So how are we pivoting? Organizations are really trying to do more with less. For example, when the federal government cut off the LGBTQ suicide hotline, Illinois said, we're going to step up. We're going to create a hotline from scratch. So the state put up money, philanthropy put up money, and now we have a hotline as of August to fill in some of those gaps. So we're trying to pivot, we're trying to be nimble. We can't fill the gaps of the federal government by any means, but where we can make a slight difference and where we can address some of those issues is going to be really important.
Mukame, you are very well aware of what we're going through here in the States. Chirag just talked about more specifically what's been happening in Illinois, but from East Africa, where you are from, denial of LGBTQ plus rights is often the norm. So I would love for you to talk about how you navigate that environment, and how do you make the case for funding, especially to donors and institutions that are hesitant or even hostile?
Yeah, so I come from Kenya, working in 7 countries in the region. Of those 7 countries, homosexuality is criminalized in 6 of them. And in all of them, there is no support for, social inclusion. There is heightened violence, and really no one has our back. And so for us, we've never operated within an open civic space. What this then has meant for LGBTIQ movements in East Africa is that we are very vested in the liberation of LGBTIQ movements in this country. We understand that our struggles are related. How have we been able to work in this hostile region? UHAI is an activist fund. We fund nascent organizations without structures, a lot of whom we are their only funder. And in our 15 years of existence, we managed to move more than 30 million USD to groups that no one would ever find. Why am I saying this? Yes, this is a message of hope. I think even as we are talking, we have to be hopeful because there's been a lot of positive changes that have happened in my region, including changes in some laws, visibility of communities that have had to be underground for very many years, community-led clinics, and most importantly, psychosocial support, building communities of care. But with all this, we've seen the increase of the hate and the anti-gender movements, a lot of whom are imported. I mean, it's like another wave of colonization in our region. Very well-resourced movements that have, created a lot of hate, including the Uganda Anti-Homosexuality Act that is really like a kill gay act. So the connections are very clear for us, and therefore how we navigate this is we have to be very collaborative. And I'll be honest, Jonathan, I don't even try to convince donors who are not for us, because this energy is better spent working with those who want to work with us but may not know how to, because the formal structures of private philanthropy do not always allow. So as an intermediary fund, we are able to get resources that would be hard to get to movements, from private philanthropy. Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. Open for Business has done a lot of work to document the cost of excluding LGBTQ people from the economy, from full economic participation. What are the impacts, not just for LGBTQ plus people, but for global economies, for keeping us out of the economy?
Yeah, and let me just start off by saying that we have actually collaborated, our 2 organizations have collaborated in the past. There are many impacts on economies. There are in fact 8, but I won't run through all of them.
Yeah, not all of them.
I'll just touch on 3.
Okay.
The first one is brain drain, which is significant, and I'll just share 2 statistics here. A study was done of 50,000 Rwandans living in Europe, and it found that 62% of them were actually skilled migrants with a university degree. And I think when people think about refugees, they often don't think that they could be skilled. A second statistic I'll share is in Slovakia, 68% of all university students want to leave the country to go to more progressive places, such as Germany, Austria, Spain, Denmark, and Canada. So that has a real cost on the economy if your brightest people are wanting to leave. And this is not just LGBTQ people. That stat I just gave you was all university students. The second cost to economies is public health. So last year we did a study on the cost of LGBTQ discrimination in East Africa, and we found that due to the discrimination and the poor health outcomes, it's costing the East African economies more than $1 billion a year. So that's, again, big cost for the economy. And then the final one I'll just briefly touch on is national reputation. There was a study done in the US and the UK that found that 51% of all tourists don't want to go to a country that has LGBTQ oppressive laws. So, and then the final one on, yeah, no, I'll leave it at that.
Chirag, I'm coming back to you because I'm just wondering, it's a two-part question. How has the current environment impacted your fundraising? And then I'm just wondering what approaches you're taking to ensure that whatever funds that you have actually reach the grassroots LGBTQ plus groups and communities that need them most.
Yeah, so we're an endowed fund, so luckily, best part of my job is I don't have to fundraise, but I do take it upon myself to try really hard to help mirror, whatever we're funding, I'm trying to reach 2 or 3 other people to say, join us in this fight, right? But that's become a lot harder.
So, okay, so on that point, since you are an endowed fund, have you seen an exponential increase in the number of people seeking?
Oh, for sure. That's a given, and I think we're trying very hard to think about, okay, how can we? As I said, we're never going to fill the gap of the federal government, right? And so, how can we kind of be nimble and try to bring people along with us, right? We've got a sort of limited amount we're able to give every year. We've got a budget. How can I bring more people along? I will say, one thing we pride ourselves on is general operating funding. I know that's a big conversation to sort of shift to more general operating funding. If your grantee, an LGBT organization, needs to pivot money to engage a cybersecurity expert or physical security, they should have the flexibility to be able to do that and be responsive, which is why I think Gen Ops funding is so important. So every time I'm sort of with other funders, I say, okay, if you're not in Gen Ops funding, let us help you kind of explain the case, why you should do that to your board and your decision makers. The other challenge I think for a lot of organizations in this space is new wealth is not necessarily following a traditional philanthropic 501c3 model, right? They're using different levers, they're using LLCs, DAFs, not as transparent. How do we get some of these incredible organizations doing incredible work before those types of people, before those individuals and those types of different kinds of giving models to bring people along to the work we're doing? So I think, to your question, getting as much resources out to these organizations, allowing them the flexibility and general operating funding to be able to address the current needs and to pivot, extremely important right now. And I think that the more chances I have to say that, I'll avail myself of that. Yeah.
Mukame, I asked the question of Chirag because, here in the United States, there's a chill all over the place in every sector, including in philanthropy. And so with there being dwindling resources for all sorts of organizations, particularly in the equality and human rights space, there can become this sort of everyone for themselves mentality. And I'm wondering from your vantage point, in times like these, in times of scarcity, why is solidarity very important? And solidarity is a wonderful, positive, optimistic word, but for a lot of people, that might not be pragmatic. So how do you make solidarity part of your mission?
I'll start by quoting my sister, Tanisha McHarris, who's a co-ED of the Black Feminist Fund, and she wrote, "Let's be clear, it's not movements led by Black, Indigenous, Brown women, LGBTQ, or disabled communities that fractured American politics. What polarizes is the deliberate stalking of white grievance, patriarchal fear, and a long tradition of racial resentment." So, yes, clap. Yes, and this is important, especially for people who are in philanthropy, to remember around, how then resourcing needs to look like. This is not the time to play into divisive politics and to, get into all these identity fights, and especially not from people who hold, most of the wealth. This is the time to really align ourselves and remember that queer people, people who are marginalized, already living, intersectional lives. I am a queer, Black, African woman who was brought up by sex workers. Already we come into the door with all the intersectionalities. So, and I'll speak very specifically around to philanthropy at this moment, and how, to support movements that have been very underfunded historically, yet they stand in the line of violence. I mean, we've seen what has happened to trans people in this country, and especially trans poor, Black people. Data from the Global Philanthropy Project shows that LGBTI funding maintains extremely low levels when considered in comparison to broader philanthropic and government funding, and the scale of funding anti-LGBT organizations. What movements already, these movements already lived at the intersection of very many identities, and what they need is flexible funding. Chirag already talked about general operating funding that is flexible, that is accessible, that is multi-year. And can we also fund reserves? Like, we show up as movements with watches full of flowers. We need resources, we need money, because our enemies are well-resourced. And this is something that we have to keep remembering. I think that it's important to know that these movements do the heavy lifting of holding the line against the growing fascist forces that are here, both in East Africa, where I come from, and also in this country and globally. So I think getting out of the, I'm a climate justice fund only, I can't touch LGBTI, we are all connected. An attack of LGBTIQ people is an attack on democracy. It's an attack on the crisis, climate justice. It's an attack of people who have disabilities. So those intersections are important to keep remembering.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about cross-sector collaboration? By that I mean the collaboration between philanthropy and private sectors to governments to grassroots organizers. Talk about that in the role of advancing LGBTQ rights in this moment of rollback.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Open for Business is all about. So to us, the lesson is clear. No single actor can move the needle alone. We see philanthropy as providing the risk capital. Governments set the frameworks. Grassroots activists provide legitimacy, and business provides the scale and the influence. And this is something that at Open for Business we see firsthand. We have corporate funding for rigorous global research, and that then equips local activists to advocate and push for change on the ground. So it's a very, for us, it's been intertwined since day one. 10 years ago, we were founded here at the Clinton Global Initiative, and now it could not be even more important.
Not more important, but in that time, have you seen there be more collaboration, less collaboration, or just about the same?
We definitely, the part with business has definitely become more complex. Some of our coalition partners are still funding our work, but want to be less visible, so we are having to navigate that. But we're very pleased that our coalition has 30 global businesses, and we've only lost 2. So they're standing firm, but the way that they interact with us has had to shift a little bit.
All right, in the less than 2 minutes we have left, I'm going to go rogue. Each of you, I'd like for you to just answer this one question, because I don't want all of the conversation to be gloom and doom and mayhem, unless that's where you are. But what gives you hope or optimism that this very challenging time that we're in that you and your organizations, your companies, will get through this? What gives you hope and optimism, Chirag?
I heard something during the Abundance book talk that Derek Thompson said, which is optimism is not thinking we're going to win or we're going to persevere. Optimism is saying the world is soft clay and I have two hands. That really resonated with me, and I've been sharing that with folks. And I think, you know, this world is made of soft clay. We've all got two hands, or many of us who do. Let's use it, and let's build upon what's come before and do what we can.
Mukame?
For me, it's our movements. 15 years ago in Kenya, the LGBTIQ community was not as visible as it is right now. I am living something that I was dreaming about when I was in my 20s or even, 30s, early 30s. So that really gives me a lot of hope, knowing that there are people actively creating the alternative, a different type of world, recognizing that what we have is broken and it's not about rebuilding it, but actually creating different alternatives. And by God, we people show up, and that makes me so hopeful.
Ken Janssens?
Oh,
I
very
give
well
you
done.
the last word with 5 seconds left.
Okay, 5 seconds. So I think what's really important for us to remember is that one of the great business success stories of the last 30 years is welcoming LGBTQ people in the workplace. And that actually gives me a lot of hope. I spent 25 years at JP Morgan, really benefited from being able to work in that environment that I could bring myself. I now lead a coalition of businesses. These businesses, you may feel are backing away, but they've been at this for 30 years. They know that it's good for their bottom line. They know it's good for talent. So that gives me hope.
Ken Janssens, Mukame Marete, Chirag Badlani, thank you all very much for being here today. All right, in our final panel discussion, we're going to explore the impact of representation, allyship, and narrative work. So please join me in welcoming James Black of the Trevor Project, Juliana Glass, This Is What Happens When Women Read, and Guy Mwalem of Vote LGBT. All right, James, since you're in the seat next to me, I will start with you. What does the landscape look like right now for LGBTQ plus youth in the United States, particularly with respect to mental health?
Yeah, I want to take this question in three parts. The population, their experiences, and then the care gap. What I'll say is that LGBTQ plus youth in the United States are facing an acute mental health crisis, so I want to start there. But in terms of the population or the demand, 1.8 million LGBTQ plus youth in the United States seriously consider suicide every year. Now, to put that in perspective, that is larger than the city of Philadelphia. So think about an entire city of LGBTQ plus young people dealing with suicidal ideation. Now, that risk of the 1.8, that's in the US, it's 40 million at risk globally. Now, from an experience perspective, it's hard enough being an LGBTQ plus young person, and many of us in this room know that deeply. But compounded with the psychological trauma of governmental targeting, that becomes unbearable, and that can be fatal. They're more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide compared to their peers, and 90% of LGBTQ plus young people said that recent politics has negatively affected their mental health. And then last is the care gap. So despite this need and the demand that I just mentioned, we just lost $25 million in government funding, creating an enormous care gap, a dangerous care gap, putting thousands of LGBTQ plus young people at risk. So when we think about the needs of the mental health of resources for LGBT plus young people, there's an enormous need for more reach, more funding, and I know we'll get into that. But the bottom line is that they are facing an acute mental health crisis, and it's up to us, the allies and the adults, to ensure that we are not letting up and we're continuing to put them at the forefront because they are the future.
Just as a follow-up, have you, the governmental targeting that you were just talking about, when it comes to philanthropy and supporters, have you seen a diminution of support from the people who supported you before we got into this mess?
We've seen people, organizations, foundations who have been with us for a very long time back out. And we've seen others who have stepped up. And then we've seen some surprising organizations and foundations that have actually knocked on the door to say, hey, we want to support you. So that's been really encouraging. What I will say is that just let's set the reality straight here. LGBTQ plus nonprofits receive less than 0.2% of charitable giving. So that's where we're starting at. That's our baseline. And so when you think about the funding element here, Jonathan, we have all of these attacks happening, especially as it relates to anti-trans rhetoric, anti-trans laws. And the philanthropic response has not scaled with the crisis. And that's, I know we're going to get into that later, but that's problematic.
Guy, I see you nodding there, but I want to talk to you about something a little different, because your organization, Vote LGBT, uses data to combat political violence against and provide psychological support to candidates in Brazil. One, how do you do that? And two, why is your work necessary?
Thank you for the question. We believe at Vote LGBT, we believe that care is a political act. So since 2020, we've been providing psychological support for queer candidates and their teams. And now in 2024, we started with Sentinella, which is a groundbreaking AI tool that combines the cutting-edge AI technology to gather data on political violence on the platforms, and also provide psychological support to candidates and their teams. And the first pilot that we ran in 2024, before the data that we had on gender violence, on gender-based political violence, was 89 cases gathered by our public prosecution, Brazilian Federal Prosecution Office, which 30% was already queer candidates. Despite being only 2% of the candidates, we gathered 30% of the attacks. But when we ran our test, we found 3,500 transphobic attacks, only on acts on YouTube. So imagine that was against only one candidate. In last year's election, there were over 3,000 out and proud queer candidates, and one of them got 3,500 transphobic attacks, only on acts on YouTube. So imagine the scale of that. So I know there's some resistance against using AI for progressive issues, but we found that it's already being used to target us, so we could actually use it. We've proven that it can be used actually to gather data, because with data we can actually promote, public opinion discussions, public discussions, and actually like protection policies. Because if you tell how big is the problem, it doesn't become like a problem of each leadership that is targeted. It becomes a problem of democracy. It's a challenge that democracy has to face. It's not each target's own task to face the violence. It's an issue of, being able to run for office in safety is like a citizenship, right? We all should have it. So we pay our taxes, we should have it too.
Juliana, let's talk about representation. How did representation, and specifically meeting and interacting with queer people for the first time, change your perception of the world?
People ask me all the time, what changed your whole life? And I said, gays and books. I was deeply indoctrinated into a conservative religion from the time I was born. Homeschooled, father was a pastor. Lovely home. However, when you're indoctrinated into a religion that in and of itself creates a hierarchical structure between individuals. It is like asking a fish to describe water. It's ubiquitous, and you're taught to be afraid. You're taught to avoid. That's how systems of control perpetuate, is that they control proximity and narrative. And it wasn't until I was 29 years old that I moved, and next door to me were a gay couple, and he was a pastor. Now, mind you, I had been a Christian pop singer for 11 years. I was the artist that Donald Trump had come and sing at his 2017 National Prayer Breakfast weekend. So when I say that I was deeply right-wing, I really was.
She was all up in it.
I was all up in it. And the LGBTQ community literally, quite literally, and it makes me want to cry, saved my life. These two men were so patient with me. They were so gracious with me. They took me out to dinner. I heard their stories of the weaponization of religion against them. And it was in that moment of solidarity, realizing that I am out of alignment with love. I am actually an active participant in the oppression of not just women, but the LGBTQ community as well, and other minority groups around the world. And I couldn't do it anymore. And so I went to the head of my spiritual head at the time, and I said, I am coming out. This was after 3 years of having these dear friends. 3 years it took me. I am coming out as pro-LGBTQ. I am coming out as pro-women. And he pointed at me and he said, well, this is what happens when women read. And I was like, oh my God, this is what happens. This is actually what happens when women... We notice systems of oppression. We can articulate the systems of oppression. We can challenge the systems of oppression. And then we go out and we change the systems of oppression. And so I am here to represent, this is what happens when women read. There is hope, because I'm standing here at the Clinton Global Initiative with you guys talking about the rights of the LGBTQ.
Follow-up. As I said, you were all up in it. Once you got out of it, how did your family react to your leaving it all behind and becoming an ally of people they did not, to be charitable, see eye to eye with?
I lost everything. I lost my third publishing deal, my next tour. I lost my family for a while, lost my marriage. These systems, these institutions that are weaponizing against people groups cannot have a woman liberating herself. And it's not to say that you can't have faith. Of course you can have faith. Everyone deserves spiritual autonomy. Everyone deserves to connect with the sacred or divine in whatever way they deem useful to them. But it is in the moment that that religion usurps the law, or that religion takes away the human dignity or the rights of other people group, that's where the line is drawn for me in the sand.
And so then, James, you know, I'm thinking of sort of the political rhetoric that we have heard in listening to Juliana. And I'm wondering how is the political rhetoric, particularly around trans identities, impacting the philanthropic landscape? And what role can narrative work play in shifting that rhetoric?
Yeah, well, just to reiterate what I said about LGBTQ plus nonprofits receiving less than 0.2% of charitable giving, I mentioned that even though we've had enormous amounts of anti-trans rhetoric and laws occurring for the past few years, again, the philanthropic response is not scaled with the crisis. And it's important to understand that political rhetoric directly affects the sustainability of organizations that are charged with supporting marginalized communities. Directly affects the sustainability. So this is where narrative shift is critical. Now, we know from our research that only 1 in 3 folks say that they know a trans person. And so that unfamiliarity, that turns into mythology. And it opens the door to the fear and to the political talking points, and to the lies, and to the stories that we hear. So this is where we have to understand that at scale, some way, somehow, we have to humanize the lives of trans and non-binary people. We have to remind people that they are our neighbors and our brothers and sisters and kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews. We have to humanize their experiences. And we do this really well at the Trevor Project through a series called Learn with Love, where you have an LGBTQ plus young person and their parents sitting down and talking about the journey, talking about their journey of acceptance and humanity. And it's a beautiful experience. And so how do we do that at scale and bring this narrative work that's really critical to changing hearts and minds to the forefront? And I think we did that really well during marriage, right? The argument went from gay rights in terms of like legalities, no, but then we started telling our love stories. And when LGBTQ plus couples started telling their love stories and the narrative shifted, right? It went from gay legal rights to marriage equality to love wins. And that's an example of a narrative shift, and this is exactly what we need to do in this moment.
And so Guy, to bring the conversation back to Brazil, I mean, your organization has achieved a significant increase in political representation of LGBTQ plus people. What do you now see as the evolving mission of Vote LGBT?
So when we started, so it's amazing. We've been like in the field for 11 years now. So when we started, we could count in one hand the number of queer, out and queer candidates. It's like 3 people in 2014, and then like 30 that we knew about, but they wouldn't come out because it would be like political suicide. So last year, we managed to provoke the electoral authority to include fields in the registration form that would allow people to declare their own identity if they wanted to, sexuality and gender identity. And to our surprise, there were over 3,000 out and proud queer candidates. More than half were women. More than half of those were Black women, and a third of those were trans women. So it's a very intersectional crowd. And what was political suicide became like a political win. 1 in every 4 cities in Brazil, in over almost 6,000 cities. So 1,400 cities had an out and proud queer candidate last year. So how did we manage to do that? Because we did like a systemic change by working with candidates, giving them support, psychological support, legal support, doing groundbreaking research, but also with parties, like pressuring them, telling them how much the electoral performance and funding inequalities about queer candidates, but also with voters, creating like nonpartisan platforms where they could choose queer candidates, but also selecting for women or for Black women or for trans persons, like it was very positive filters. And also with institutional wins. We managed in 2018 to include chosen name in voters' ID, so trans people could run for office without being that named. And over 40,000 voters changed their voter ID to their chosen name. It was beautiful. And now with that win with the fields. But with that, we realized when so we've been doubling the amount of elected officials every election. Last year, we came from 97 councillors to 233 last years. But when they get there, we realize they can't do much of our rights because they're too little. And they fight for everyone. So now we change from getting them elected to mobilizing queer technologies, cultures, and politics towards the full citizenship of everyone.
I'm just going to tell the timekeepers, just be prepared, we're going over. Because Juliana, as an ally, to pick up on the narrative point, how can we reframe the narrative around LGBTQ plus rights so that it resonates with resonates more broadly and bring new allies to the table? And in that, I'm just wondering, after you came out as an out loud and proud LGBTQ ally, did other people from within the evangelical movement who you knew, did they come to you and become allies themselves?
Yes, I will answer that question first. You guys, courage breeds courage, and I think that when a woman uses her voice, when any human uses their voice, it offers permission to those who don't feel safe. And ultimately, we want to feel safe. We want to feel safe in our full person. And to address the narrative question, we cannot approach dogmatism with more dogmatism. So people that live in a very dogmatic state, far over on the extreme ends, you can't address that with more dogmatism. It just further perpetuates the issue. So I believe that what you were referring to, love stories, like we have to find the thing that lives in that liminal space that allows someone who's so certain, who's so dogmatic, who's so sure, who's so angry, who is so afraid. We have to find that liminal space, which to me is art. It is queer art, it is queer love, it is the drag queens, it is your music, it is your dance, it is your dress, it is your exuberance. Like, this is the liminal space that allows someone who exists in a dogmatic state to go, oh, I can imagine something new. I can imagine something beautiful. It's really, really difficult to hate and stand against someone that you get close to, and to art and to beauty, which is the LGBTQ community.
And so to end this conversation, as you can see, we have 90 seconds left, but we're gonna go over. What is one call to action? One way that everyone listening, and Guy, I'm gonna start with you. One way that everyone listening can actively support equality and protection of human rights. Just one thing.
One way, quick. Okay. See, it's hard. What I have to say is that in 2026 election, despite what I'm saying about the gains in queer representation in Brazil, we are under threat. Like, the extreme right is rising over there, and we are in serious danger of losing the election for the extreme right next year, which would be like horrible for democracy. We would just become like, I don't know, maybe a new colony. I don't know. So what we say is that we can do, like, the far right is already funded, but we need to be funded too. That is, we prove we can ship things, but without support, there's nothing to be done. So it's not only about inclusivity, it's about the future of democracy. That's what 2026 stands for us. So please join on this fight.
Juliana?
The one thing I would say to 47 self-professing American evangelical women that might or might not be watching, use your voice. I know that there are so many women that are simmering underneath the lid of their own suppression, and I want you to know that you will not be alone. Maybe the church doesn't want you to come out, maybe your husband doesn't want you to come out, but come out and use your voice. Your liberation breeds the liberation for all of humanity.
James?
The most American thing that you can do, the most global citizen thing you can do, is ensure that these kids survive. So as you're thinking about your frameworks, your strategies, your mental health interventions, if you are not including LGBTQ plus youth, then those interventions are incomplete. And so just know we cannot address mental health as citizens if we're losing or we're leaving parts of our humanity out there. And we cannot leave LGBTQ plus youth behind.
James Black, Juliana Glass, Guy Mwalem, thank you all very much for being here today. Thank you all very much for coming to this session.
This session has now concluded. Thank you for attending. This session has now concluded. Please make your way to your next session. The next session in this room will be at 3:30 p.m., An Economic Future That Works for All. Thank you for attending.